Hey, what is up, everybody? We are out here in Jacksonville, Florida. Sorry for the funky hair. I'm just getting ready to go into the gym and work out. And hey, my hair's messy. I don't give a damn. I'm sitting here drinking a Bang Energy. We're going to be talking about some podcasts that you guys should look into, listen to, because I know a lot of people are wanting to listen to podcasts, but they don't know where to turn. They don't know what podcasts are funny, what podcasts are enjoyable. So I'm going to break down a few podcasts that I like to listen to. These are not all video podcasts, but some are video, some are audio. And we're going to start with Everybody Knows his podcast. Everybody knows the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, okay? Everybody knows what that is. It's Joe Rogan who talks about marijuana, talks about UFC fights, and everything in between. That dude just has a podcast where he talks about anything and everything. Probably the most easiest to listen to podcast, okay? Definitely probably the easiest to listen to podcast. Some topics you might not like about, because he talks about everything, like I said, from UFC to fighting to marijuana to working out, being healthy, and he tries to motivate people as well. You have people like Fighter and the Kid. It's basically very similar to what Joe Rogan does, but it's Brendan Schaub, former UFC fighter, and Brian Callen, a top-rated, high-level comedian, which is very funny, and they go back and forth, right? It's like two friends just shooting the shit, having a great time. So it's called the Fighter and the Kid podcast. And then one of the best podcasts I've been listening to for about a year now is called The Church of What's Happening Now. And no, it's not a religious podcast. It has comedian Joey Diaz and his friend Lee Syed, which is like his producer, his buddy. And they do have guests on there, but I think the most personal podcast that I like the most is when it's Lee and Joey Diaz by themselves, because Joey Diaz really, when they're together and it's only them and no guests, he really talks like how to better your life, how to motivate yourself to do better, and that's exactly what he talks about in this next podcast. All the links to good podcasts are in the links below, and he's talking about how he went from nothing to being something, and he really has me thinking when I listen to his podcast. Like, he really motivates you and thinks about how can you better yourself and what do you need to do to step your game up. And he's always been a very positive guy, and he's a very like high level comedian, actor, but he really is like a real ass dude. Like, he really sits down and tells you, like, no BS, like, you're a piece of garbage because you're not doing anything with your life. Oh, so if you're a fan of Jack Black and Tenacious D, in the links below, H3H3 is two YouTubers. It's a guy and his wife, which I'm not familiar with their names because I don't really pay attention. I just go in there and watch the podcast when there's something interesting on it. And Jack Black's on that podcast this week, and it's very, very funny. It's very high quality, very well put together. It's called the H3H3 podcast, and they're basically probably on the level of a Joe Rogan podcast with like the viewership they get. That is something that a lot of YouTube podcasts aren't getting, and they're doing it right. They're not just using like a web camera. They're using great studio audio, great video quality, so it's highly produced, and it's not just like the same old YouTube podcast where like me and my buddy doing a podcast with like some web cameras. No, it's kind of like Joe Rogan. Like when one of them talks, the camera's on them. When their guest talks, there's a camera on them. So it's highly, highly produced. Highly recommend the H3H3 podcast, baby. If you're looking for just like basic, a one topic type of podcast, Frono's Photo from, Jared Poland from Frono's Photo does the Raw Talk podcast. And to me, I think podcasts that are based around one topic and one topic only is not always the most fun to watch, because how much can you talk about like the latest and greatest iPhone or the latest and greatest like whatever? You know, to me, a podcast is a way to shoot the shit and to talk to your audience and just to talk, have a two-way conversation. That's why I think people like Joe Rogan is so popular, because he just shoots the shit. And it's not about like one topic. It's not just, hey, this is a camera podcast and we're just going to talk about cameras. And yes, talking about cameras or whatever your topic is cool, because it gives you something to go into the podcast and talk about. But I think a lot of podcasts that set a standard of, okay, we're going to have all these topics and we're going to talk about them all in the thing, that's cool. But if you just talk about one topic, which is like Jared Polin does, and all it is cameras, it's highly produced, a really good podcast if you're into learning about cameras. And which is a silly podcast, which is Your Mama's House. And Your Mama's House podcast is Christina Pazinski and Tom Segura. They're a husband and wife. They're comedians, and basically their podcast is around, they get like weird viral videos of like weirdest things. Like my buddy Dan, he would definitely love this podcast, because they do like the weirdest of the weird. They'll find like the most sexual videos, the most like awkward content on YouTube or on the internet, and they'll like do commentary over it and make their statement of, okay, this guy's looking for this person's doing that. But for me, it's a very funny, enjoyable podcast. It's just some of the content they're talking about. Like recently, they had a $2 million deal with McDonald's, and McDonald's said, we'll pay you $2 million to sponsor our show, and they're going to give them realistically $2 million because they are a big podcast. So while they were talking about McDonald's and doing like their ad, they showed a video of some guy talking about like a butt plug, and McDonald's called them up and was like, we don't want our stuff being sponsored and broadcast over content about butt plugs. And Tom Segura goes, well, what'd you think our podcast was about? We talk about crazy people doing crazy things. We're the most silliest podcast. We do crazy things. We'll watch a video of a guy like taking a dump on the floor and then do commentary about it. What are you talking about? Saying, oh, you, and McDonald's now is like, oh, you guys are not welcome in our McDonald's anymore because you do sick stuff. You guys talk about nasty stuff. And to be honest, a lot of people love that kind of shit, because it's like the weirdest of the weird side of the internet, of the kind of content they talk about. And that's the realistic thing. They don't care. They talk about weird, crazy things. They always talk about farting. His wife always talks about, oh, I took a dump in the toilet. Don't go in the bathroom for 45 minutes because it smells like garbage. That's exactly what they talk about. Crazy, weird stuff. That's just what I wanted to talk to you guys about, you know? I just wanted to sit out here at the park and talk to you guys about some of the good podcasts that I think you guys should be watching, you know? These podcasts are funny, hilarious. They're all very, very similar, you know? They're all in that aspect of they talk about anything and everything, and that's how a podcast grows, you know? That's why I think a podcast should be, like Joe Rogan always says, it's just a two-way conversation. That's all it is. It's nothing more. If I'm talking to you guys, that's all it is. And all Jared Polin says from FronosPhoto.com, he says the way to make a podcast is all you need is a way to record audio. I could be doing a podcast like this, just sitting in the park every day, having a two-way conversation with you guys. All I need is some good topics, and I talk for 10 to 15 minutes. You upload it, that's a podcast. Podcast doesn't have to be long-form audio for 3-4 freaking hours. But if you guys take anything away from this video, just remember, all the podcasts are free. All the podcasts are on YouTube. And some of the podcasts are longer than others. The H3 podcast, I think, is the shortest amount of podcasts, like time. I think it's like an hour, maybe. There is a few other podcasts that I'm not going to mention because I'm just not really into them like that. I'll watch them from time to time. There's Sarah Dietschy's podcast, which it's an okay podcast. I wouldn't say it's great by any means. I would just say because she has a big following on YouTube, that's the only reason she gets a lot of views, and she gets basically she more or less interviews other high-end YouTubers, and to me, it's not that fun just interviewing people, and it's always about how'd you become a big YouTuber, how'd you get views. That's boring shit. You know, I want to know if I'm interviewing like my boy Megadeth Dan, I want to know what his first mosh pit was all about. Damn, that car had, oh, that's a motorcycle. That's a motorcycle rolling up. That dude has a loud ass pipes. What's up, loud ass pipes? Haha, that's what you gotta have. But it's like, it'd be like me asking my boy, like Megadeth Dan here on YouTube, why you want to become a moto vlogger? What's the reasoning you got into metal instead of hip hop? What's your favorite beer? Like, have you ever blacked out and woke up in a random place? Those are like the craziest things I would ask people if I was interviewing them on a podcast, asking them the craziest questions. It's like this. What would you do if you had $1 million, or would you take the $1 million of Amazon money? Because that's a big question. The question of the day is, would you rather have $1 million or $1 million in Amazon money? Get that out of here. Yes, you can buy anything and everything on Amazon. You can buy toilet paper, condoms, you can buy beer, you could buy CD players, TVs, VCRs, whatever. You could buy anything and everything on Amazon. But the only thing you can't do with Amazon money is you can't travel the world. And I would take the realistic money because I would want to travel the world and see what the world has to offer. And that's exactly what I would do. If I had $1 million right now, I would be traveling as much as I possibly could before I die. Because that's my ultimate goal in life, is to travel as much as possible, to see every single damn country I can. My name is Trevor, and these are the top podcasts that you guys need to check out. So as always, I'm Trevor, and I'm out, baby. Ha ha, I'm going that way. Now get that camera on my face, sucker.